So as you can see, the title for today's webinar, and what we'll be looking at is how we help our lower level learners develop both their language skills and their skills for work. And obviously by language skills, I mean the vocabulary, grammar, the receptive and productive skills. And for work, I'm talking about communication, examples including things like face-to-face communication, email writing, telephoning, so on. So the plan for today is as follows. I'm going to look at some learner profiles of the type of low-level students that I teach, and you can compare that with your own, see if it's something similar or something different. And then I would like to introduce the approach and the configuration of business partner at the A1 and A2 levels, and particularly draw attention to the key differences between the lower levels and the other six levels in business partner. Then I will, I'd like to focus in on one of those area of differences, which is the vocabulary teaching and how we're approaching that with the lower levels. And this is from the market research that we've done with other teachers around the world. This was a top priority. Vocabulary is considered a top priority for our learners. And when I talk about vocabulary, it's not just individual lexical items, also phraseology, collocations, and functional language, and I'll show you how that's taught. And then obviously the other area I said is one area was language skills, and the other area is work skills, and I'll be showing you some ways that that's practiced in the A2 level. I'm going to focus on the A2 level for today's, but it applies to both A1 and A2 level. So to start with, it's a little slightly fictionized learner profiles from students that I have taught. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about these students, who they are, where they work, and why they need English. So I'll start with Fran. He's in his mid-40s, and he works in a factory as a maintenance technician. He repairs machines for a Spanish subsidiary of a German manufacturer, and they make microchips for mobile phones and credit cards. And the reason he needs English is because increasingly the machinery is being bought from all over the world, from Israel, from South Africa, from the United States, and his training in this new machinery is being given in English, and therefore he has to deal with visitors to the factory. And also he's been asked to go to the United States next year to actually receive training there. Next to him is Noor, and she's a customer service agent. She's in her mid-30s, and she's a customer service agent for a transport logistics company here in Spain. But she's actually from Morocco. So part of her responsibility is the North African market, and she's been employed for her language skills and knowledge of her home market. And but she also is aware that she wants to learn English for two reasons: because she wants to be able to get on in her present job, but also for career progression for her. And then we have Beatrice. Beatrice is early 40s. She's a health and safety manager. She works in the human resources department of an e-commerce company, quite a new company. They sell clothes, accessories, and shoes. And although it was originally a Spanish startup, it's been taken over by a French e-commerce company. And so now her manager is keen for everyone in the human resources department to work on international projects for the company, and therefore he wants to make sure that his staff have a good level of English to be able to do that. And finally, we have Josette. Now he is in his mid-50s. He's the sales rep for a small and medium-sized enterprise here in Spain. I'm based in Spain, I should say. And his company is a distributor of silicones and adhesives for industrial use, including the automotive industry. And what his company has done is formed a strategic alliance with other European distributors in the same market. And so now he's finding that he receives visitors from sales reps from other countries, and he may be involved in meetings to talk about sales strategy with the other partners in the strategic alliance. So what they all have in common is, they are a diverse group, but they're a very representative group of low-level students that I teach. And what they all have in common is that they're kind of 35 plus. They did not learn English at school, or they had a very limited contact with English at school. Some of them may have done French as a foreign language at school. They may have had contact with English for their travels, through popular culture as well, to pop songs and things like that. Their jobs. So their jobs tend to be administration, support roles, reception, secretarial, office workers, sales reps, and also specialists in certain areas like Van, who's a technician, or engineers, software engineers, car electronics, pharmaceuticals. Other profiles that I get, like Noor, I might have other migrant workers there from places like Morocco or China or South America who are now working in Spain. And then occasionally some younger workers who have studied English in secondary school but haven't really engaged it for some reason. They've come to work now with quite a low level. Those are the kind of main groups I'm talking about. What you find is all language learners have cognitive and affective factors. And when I talk about cognitive factors, I'm talking about beliefs about the world. So things like you believe that if you can improve your language skills, your English skills, that you will get a better job, you'll get promotion, you'll progress more in your career. That's on one level. And then the affective factors are about your emotions, about how you feel about learning a language. Now, that can be obviously positive or negative. And very often I find with the lower level learners that they have quite a high level of anxiety sometimes, and lack of confidence in their ability, and they may not even be motivated because they might feel that this has been forced on them, that they haven't necessarily wanted to do these courses. So those are kind of affective factors. And what you might get is this sense that what I often hear is, well, young people can just pick up languages like a sponge, and at my age, it's difficult or it's impossible even. So you've got that fixed mindset, which I've mentioned in a previous webinar, where it is more apparent, I think, in the lower levels. So why do they need English? As I say, nowadays we have certain professions and industries where it is basically the norm. So if you're working in IT or software, if you're a software engineer, if you're working in tourism, for instance, all of those professions are going to need the automotive industry as well, the e-commerce, transport, etc. So there's certain professions and certain industries where it just is the norm. You need English to be able to work effectively in your industry, to be able to progress in your profession. As I say earlier, it also is a way of getting a good job and earning, increases your earning power to have English. At least for the last 20 years now, we've seen that in the past, English was the preserve of senior management, and now it is companies want their employees right across the board at every level, from the factory floor to the boardroom, to have a working level of English. And related to that, of course, is the fact that global companies are increasingly using English as the official language. I mean, this is not something new either. It went back to Nissan had their English first strategy in the 1990s. The German electronics company Siemens has also had English as official language for many years now. More recently, Honda has decided in 2015 that English would become the corporate language by 2020, next year. And not just the car industry, also the electronic companies and tech companies like Microsoft and SAP and Samsung and so on. So those are the why. And what do our students need then? So what they particularly need is the ability to function effectively in an international workplace, and they need the language skills and the work skills to do that. They also need to attain a sense of progress, because they feel like they're starting, like they're kind of late runners, and therefore they need to feel that they can make progress and that they can make progress quite quickly. They need really as well engaging content that is immediately relevant to their experiences in the workplace, and it needs to be delivered at low levels in these very short, manageable chunks, so that in the same type of media that they're used to working with in their daily lives, so that be email, telephoning, and so on. And finally, they need confidence. Confidence too. Well, I mean, when I say by confidence, I mean two things here. They need to feel confident that what they're learning in terms of language and skills is going to be relevant to them and useful to them. And also they need confidence building in some cases if they have come with that affective factor where they don't feel that they're going to be able to do it. And teachers' needs, obviously teachers have needs too. Obviously part of our needs is related to the learners' needs. We need to be able to provide that for them. We need to be able to cater to mixed ability classes. Some people are going to be able to move faster than others. We have a very limited number of hours, teaching hours these days, especially if you're teaching in company. So we need to be able to show students that they can make progress even with a limited number of hours. And so we need to, as I say, build their confidence in their abilities. So that's us and them. I'm going to move on now to how business partner is structured at A1 and A2 level before I show you some examples. Now you see here I've highlighted some items in blue because those are the things I'm going to be focusing on specifically today in today's session. There isn't time to go through a whole lot, the whole thing. So I'm going to focus in what are the key issues that I want to raise today. And I'd like to say that there are two key differences between A1 and A2 levels of business partner and the other 6 levels. And those are that there is a linear approach to the course. So whereas we said in the other levels, business partner is completely modular. You can do the lessons in any order you like. You can do the units in any order that you like. Nothing is dependent on anything that's gone before that's come afterwards. This is not the case in business partner at A1 and A2 level. I think for obvious reasons. I think as a teacher of low-level students, you would know that wouldn't work very well. In fact, probably wouldn't work at all. So the other reason being, the second reason, key issue is that we need to teach some things sequentially, and we need to recycle and revise them. And so that's the key differences there. Other key differences is how we use the vocabulary in these lower levels, and I'll be showing you a little bit about that today. So I'm going to focus on some of the key differences, in particularly the vocabulary work and language, how we teach vocabulary at these levels, and how we teach work skills at these levels. And I'll make passing reference to the grammar as well here, and I'm particularly looking at how using video is different from other levels. So moving on, let's start with the vocabulary. So what vocabulary do we teach in business English? And if you think about the vocabulary you teach with your low-level general English students, we kind of talk about daily routines, like get up, have a shower, have breakfast, that kind of thing. You might talk about your family, hobbies, weekend activities, which is all great. It's all very nice vocabulary. But it's not going to help our business English students immediately when they leave the classroom. And it's going to take longer for them to get there and to be able to function in a work environment. So what kind of vocabulary do they need then in a work environment? Well, let's look at an example from A2 level, elementary level, about doing business. So here is a lexical set I'd like to show you. And I've highlighted an order, the noun order in blue, and I'm going to show you what level this has been rated on the Common European Framework for Languages and in the general global scale of English. So as you can see here, this is rated as a B1, as an intermediate level word. However, A2 elementary students need to be able to know that word. Now, what I'd like you to do now is think about the rest of this lexical set and what level you would give that, either on the global scale of English or in the Common European Framework for Languages. And I'll show you the answers in a moment. Okay. So, as you can see here, deliver is a B2, an upper intermediate word, 60 on the global scale of English. Delivery is B1 plus, high end of the intermediate level, 54. And the next word, order as a verb, is 57 on the Global Scale of English, which makes it a B1 plus in the Common European Framework, which is again at the high end of intermediate. And then supplier is a 69. It's B2 plus. It's the high end of upper intermediate. Now, hopefully you agree with me that you would not leave it until the high end of upper intermediate for a business English student at a low level to know this lexical set. I think it's very important for them that they see this language a whole lot earlier. The other thing that I think is important is that they also see some of the common collocations with this language. So things like to place an order and to make a delivery. I wouldn't put not all of the collocations, but at least some of the key collocations, so that they're not seeing this vocabulary in isolation, that they do see it in context. Now, let's have a look then at how we do this in the A2 in the elementary level. Oh, no, we won't. I'll do that in a moment. First, I'd just like to make a few more comments about the approach to vocabulary teaching. And I'd like to mention the forgetting curve here, and it's about how we make language and vocabulary memorable. The forgetting curve is also known as the Ebbinghaus curve, because it was invented by the psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus back in the 1880s. And he wanted to see what happens to memory. So he experimented on himself, and he taught himself some nonsense syllables, and then he sort of tried to see how much he could remember them. And of course, he found that it was alarmingly memory is alarmingly short, and that he forgot the words very quickly. And then in order to, what's interesting as well, although he only experimented on himself, he was as one subject. Neuroscientists have confirmed his hypotheses. They've done other experiments with large samples of participants and found the same thing. So you either use it or lose it, basically. So what Ebbinghaus and other neuroscientists since then as well is also seeing what techniques we can use to help reduce the forgetting curve and to help our keep things in our long-term memory. And one of these methods is spaced repetition, meaning that you study the language at different times over increasingly longer intervals of period of times. So it's not the same looking at a word and studying it 6 times in the same day as looking at a word and then seeing it a few hours later, a few days later, and maybe in a few weeks later. Now, that principle is incorporated into the low-level vocabulary syllabus, so that students will see vocabulary presented in lesson 1, and then they will see that vocabulary in lesson 2, lesson 3, and across the unit, and that vocabulary will come up again in later units. So it's very much about recycling and reinforcing across the course book. And what I'll also show you is the examples in a moment of how it's done, how we help with this spaced repetition, use it or lose it, the use it or lose it principle, how we help give students exercises where they're doing something that's the language to encourage cognitive depth. Also, how we're doing stuff that is about giving students deliberate practice to help them do something with the language that is both relevant and engaging and makes it more memorable. And a key issue as well with the vocabulary syllabus in the lower levels is that we've gone for quality over quantity. So let me again, now I'll move on to the examples from the from A2 level, from elementary level, of how we've incorporated that particular lexical set. So they will start the lesson on doing business, and the first lesson will be, as you can see, the outcome is learners can talk about deliveries, orders, and quantities. So they're talking the deliveries and orders, vocabulary focus, and quantities is the grammar focus. And then they get a simple question there, to personalized question to think about food apps and which ones they use. Then what they see next is the key lexical items in a very short text. As you can see, they're highlighted in bold. And the first task they have to do is to just identify if they're verbs or nouns. And if you can see there as well, you can see in line 3 of that text, we've got that collocation, place your order. And in line 4, just below that, we've got that collocation, making deliveries. So they're there, the students get to see them. The second exercise then to help them practice that language is to put it into another context. So they take the word and they put it into the right sentence below. And again, we're using those collocations again there. So we're talking about placing an order and making deliveries. We can also, you can see another collocation there, delivery service. So they're in there, they're there for the students to see, and it contextualizes the language and provides for, yeah. So to move on, the second lesson, as I say, this is an example of how this language is recycled. What they're going to be looking at now is placing orders on the telephone, and they're going to be working on practicing simple orders, making simple orders on the telephone. So the first task, the lead-in, is very simple, A-B task, where they're asking and answering questions about the order to complete the form. And then you see that they then will listen to a conversation where somebody's placing an order, and they've got a global task, and then they've got a detailed task where they're completing the order. And then they will look in more detail at the functional language. And as I said, the functional language is part of the vocabulary that they're learning from this course. So what we do here with the listing, what we've done is put the key vocabulary, the key functional language into separate tracks on the audio, so that each one of those 10 sentences, phrases, is recorded separately. So that means that teachers can then use that to help the students practice the pronunciation, intonation of those phrases, and again helping them to memorize them as chunks, of meaningful chunks. And then, as you can imagine, what they then have to go on to do then is working at being 2 role plays, where they're either the customer or the salesperson, and they can use all this useful language in their own role plays. So hopefully, again, that kind of functional language will be transferable for a lot of people outside the classroom, and a lot of the telephone language that's there, and a lot of the language for ordering. So just to say now, talk about lesson 1 again. The next part of lesson 1 was about the communicative grammar I want to mention briefly. And I'm going to look at another lesson now, another unit, in fact. It's from, again, A2, elementary, and it's Unit 3, where we're looking at changes. The subject, the topic of the unit is changes. So we start off by looking at the timeline for a company. In this case, it's Costa Coffee. And you can see there that we have the Costa Coffee story set out nice and simply, and very small items there with the verbs highlighted. These are the key verbs for the lesson, 8 verbs. And what students, hopefully, again, by seeing the verbs in sentences and context, it helps them with the meaning of those verbs. And this is a case when this particular communicative grammar is about talking about changes. And we're looking at the past simple here, and the past simple of regular verbs, you'll probably guess. Now, what students have to do with this is match the verbs that they've been introduced to in the vocabulary exercise with the past simple form of those regular verbs. That's just 2 examples there. And you know, students can, it's really here, it's the vocabulary that's more challenging than the actual grammar of this particular grammar, because they can see quite simply, they can work out for themselves how to form the past simple. So that is one use of how the vocabulary and the grammar work together in the first lesson. That brings me on to another element, the third element that I wanted to talk about, which was about videos. Now, videos are exactly the same as in the other levels. There are 2 types of video in A1 and A2 level. And there is what we call the real world business videos that will come up in lesson 1, and then there's the dramatized videos that will come up in lesson 4. But there are crucial differences between how we've approached the use of video in the lower levels to the higher levels, because obviously, as you can imagine, video is quite challenging, listening is quite challenging for these low-level students. So there are some, so therefore the same thing for the higher levels, that we use video, we use 2 types of video. The difference is how we use them at the lower levels, and I'd like to show you an example now of how we use them at lower levels. So I'm going to start by, this is lesson 1 again. You've just seen the timeline for Costa Coffee, and it's the company story, and we've looked at certain verbs there that are presented as vocabulary. Then we've looked at the grammar of talking about the past and the regular verbs in the past simple, and students will have been presented that vocabulary and that grammar, and they'll have practiced it extensively. And then what we do here with the video is we put it at the end of the lesson. So unlike the higher levels where video comes at the beginning of the lesson as input, comprehension work and vocabulary presentation, it's coming here at the end of the lesson. And there's very good reasons for that, but I will come back to those in a moment. What I'd like to do first is just show you what we do in this video is have 2 companies, 2 real stories. And I'd like you to look at this first story first and just think about what support and scaffolding and what help is given to students at low levels with this particular video. Okay, so I'm just going to swap over to put the video on now.
Postmark is a company based in London. It sells quality cards and gifts.
My name is Leona Jansen-Smith and I am a director at Postmark.
Who started the business?
My husband Mark started the business in 2004. He wanted to sell really good quality cards at a great price. After 2 years, in 2006, the annual turnover was approximately £120,000. Last year it was approximately £1.3 million.
How many stores and how many employees do you have?
We now have 4 stores and employ 24 people.
Postmark hired Morgan Dudley as head of operations in 2015. Morgan has a lot of experience in sales. Leona thinks this was an important decision for the business. Morgan helped them to expand the business.
My name's Morgan Dudley. I studied fashion design in South Africa from 2003 to 2006.
When did you arrive in the UK and what did you do?
I arrived in the UK in 2008 and I started as a sales assistant.
When did you join Postmark?
I joined Postmark in 2013. I started as a sales associate and then I managed a store and then I moved on to head of operations. I love the small business environment. Leona and Mark really look after their team and you're allowed a lot of flexibility.
Okay, so that was the first story from that lesson on talking about change. And as you can see, there was actually 2, it's quite nice because there were actually 2 stories in there. There was the company story, but it was also the employee story as well. And what this kind of scaffolding and support they've got, well, obviously they've already done a lesson. In the lesson, they've already looked at key vocabulary on verbs, regular verbs in the past. They've already done the grammar there of question forms. The other support they get within the video is they see the questions on screen, they hear the presenter's voice, and the speakers are speaking nice and clearly, so that the students get plenty of support there. Now, what we can also do is up the challenge a little bit. So with the second story, there's a second story here for this lesson, It's again, they're talking about the same thing. They're talking about changes within their company. But we've upped the challenge a little bit. So again, as you watch this, I'd like you to think about how is this second story that the students will see done slightly differently from the first story. Are you ready?
The Cambridge Satchel Company makes and sells bags.
My name is Julie Dean. I created the Cambridge Satchel Company. I started the company in 2008 with £600. 4 years later, the company was valued at £40 million. When I started Cambridge Satchel, there were brown bags, dark brown bags, and black bags. But we then moved into a range of different colours. I decided to start a factory in 2011. We have 155 employees. Now we have shops in Cambridge, London, Oxford, Brighton and Edinburgh.
My name is Max Carey and I am Head of Special Projects with the Cambridge Satchel Company. Before I joined Cambridge Satchel Company, I had my own shop. I joined the Cambridge Satchel Company in 2012 to manage the sales of bags and accessories to other shops.
Max's job changed when the Cambridge Satchel Company opened their first shop in London.
I started to work on store design, which is the look and the feel of the shop. My new job was to design our first shop. What I most enjoy about the Cambridge Satchel Company is that I have the freedom to work on creative projects, and that is a real joy.
As you can see, there's kind of two stories within a story. There's the company's development, but also the employee's story as well there. And as you can see, again, the differences between the first story and the second story is that we don't have the presenter voiceover. We don't see the questions on screen. So we've kind of upped the challenge a little bit. But again, you know, it's grading it so that students, when they get to the second one, they feel more prepared and they feel more confident in their abilities. And what's very nice about that second video as well is the kind of use of the visual support as well when we're talking about brown bags and black bags and dark brown bags, and then we see the color range as well. What students get then is that by putting the videos at the end of the lesson, there's a great deal more flexibility and there's a great deal more for support for students when they come to the videos. And also what it means as well, another important piece of support that we have for learners that are really struggling and is that with the My English Lab, they can get the videos, access to the videos with subtitles as well. And teachers can get access to the videos with subtitles. And I mean, this is absolutely great for learner training and self-directed learning, because then the students can go away after class and watch the video again at their own pace and really get to grips with the language and what the speakers are saying. After they do the videos, I should say that students actually do an activity where they talk about A/B activity, where they get some information and talk about a company as if they were, a presenter of their own company story there. And if you've got strong students, they may well be able to do a short presentation, in fact, of their own company with this scaffolding. So the other type of video then is the dramatized video, and again, how we've approached this is different in the lower levels to how we've done it in the other 6 levels of business partner. And primarily, the big difference is that we don't give them different versions of a scenario to get them to compare them. We're giving them one story, one good model of how to do something, and that's what they work with, and it's split into parts. So the work skill here is actually socializing for work. And you think, well, can students at a very low, a basic, I mean, A2 is described as has a basic level of English, and what they need is kind of very short chunks of language, and to communicate in a very simple way. And you know, I found, and I'm sure you have as well, that even though they probably have a survival level of English, they want to be able to socialize as well as do transactional things in English as well. They need to be able to communicate on a social level with their colleagues, whether they're having a coffee or meeting in the canteen. So let's have a look, one last video for today, of how two people are doing this in the dramatized video.
Max?
Julia, how lovely to see you. I heard you were here. How are you?
Very well, thanks. And you?
Oh, good, good. Shall we get a coffee?
That would be great.
When did you arrive?
Well, I went to Paris yesterday. I had some business meetings there, and I flew here this morning.
That sounds like a busy schedule.
It is. But now I'm here, I can relax and enjoy the conference.
Yes, the conference will be great. By the way, what are you doing for lunch? Would you like to join me and my colleagues? I'll introduce you to Maria Stavru, our new sales manager for your region.
Thanks, I'd love to join you.
Great. We're going to meet here at 12:30 and go to the restaurant.
Sounds good. I'll see you back here.
Absolutely. So,
So there you have it. This is part A of the video. And, you know, this is something that provides a nice model for students for meeting and greeting people, making simple invitations. Shall we get a coffee? Would you like to join us for lunch? You know, and so that's the lead in to them getting together. And I think that provides a nice model for students. And the second part, I won't show you the second part of the video, but the second part of the video goes into them making small talk when they meet for lunch. And again, you know, you can give students these very simple chunks of language, which will help them to be able to use this in the real world. So what do you think of is a very nice piece of language for them to learn. And then I think and I like. I should say that this particular unit was about organizing, and they talk about trade fairs and exhibitor stands. So this vocabulary they'll have seen in several lessons before they get to lesson 4. Now, what we do then with this language that they get is provide them with the language from the video in a box, and they can see it all there about starting conversations, giving opinions, inviting and agreeing and disagreeing, very simple ways, very simple chunks. They get to do a bit of control practice with this, where they can see these same phrases again, with obviously changing what they're talking about, changing the adjective in the replies. Then they get a slightly less control practice task where they can put the key questions in and replies into the dialogue. And then again, if you've got them working in pairs, they can practice this dialogue together. And really help them to internalize these key phrases. And then obviously the final freer practice task would be to give them an A/B roll cards, and let them write together, develop their own dialogue together, write it together, rehearse it together, and if they want to, you can rehearse it in front of the whole class. So this is this idea that with you know, very simple structures that students can put together in a simple way, can do all of these things. So that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I'd like to just remind you that some key issues from these low levels are that the approach is linear, so that we need to do lesson 1 before lesson 2 before lesson 3. We need to do unit 1 before unit 2, different from the higher levels. And because it's linear, it also means then that we're recycling vocabulary, and also that the grammar is sequential as well, that it goes from simpler grammar items to more complex grammar items. And that second point I'd like to say is that vocabulary is not level specific, but it's to do with the frequency that those words might be in a particular business environment, a particular topic that they need to talk about. And obviously the third point is the use of video, that you know, we're using the real word videos at the end of a lesson once all the language has been practiced, and that we're using the one dramatized video to show students a good model for their work skills. So as you probably already read, Benjamin Bloom said that very few teachers would be satisfied to excuse me, very few tutors would be satisfied to regard information or knowledge as the primary or the sole outcome of instruction. What is needed is some evidence that the students can do something with their knowledge, that is, that they can use information in new situations and problems. And I think that's also what our students want as well. And that's what we aim to do with this course. So I will stop there and hand back to Richard now to deal with any questions.